In this episode, we're talking about the redevelopment and remediation of brownfield sites, specifically those that are highly contaminated. We'll also discuss bringing clarity to these large and complex problems and what happens when that clarity becomes muddied.
Hi and welcome. Buckle up for a new episode of Beyond the Green Line, the only podcast hooking you up for a virtual coffee date with some of the leading change makers, industry experts, and everyday activists in environmental and agricultural sciences. So pop in your headphones, go for a walk, and get ready for inspiration, ideas, insights, and real-life stories beyond the green line we balance along.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Green Line. I'm your host, Chanel Gleeson-Willie. Our guest today is Ian Brookman, General Manager for Strategy and Development, Environmental Services at Ventia, and past President and Honorary Lifetime Member of the Australasian Land and Groundwater Association. Hi, Ian. It's really lovely to chat with you again.
Hi, Chanel, and lovely to chat with you too. And thank you for having me, and congratulations on the podcast as well. I've listened to quite a few of the episodes, and you've had some fantastic guests and some really interesting topics, and it's a really great initiative. So well done.
Thank you so much, Ian, for your compliments about the podcast. We were actually chatting before we started recording today about some of the great guests we've had on in the past and how we've had some really passionate and inspiring people. So looking forward to adding you to the list today.
Good stuff.
So Ian, you actually started your career as a geologist. Now, I'm really interested to find out how you actually found yourself where you are now, because my youngest brother is also a geologist and has gone in a very different direction. So how did you find your way into contaminated land management and remediation?
It's a good question. I mean, I found myself, in the environment space of, in the environmental space which I work in now, really because, as a small child, when I was young, I was really passionate about natural history. I kind of wanted to be David Attenborough. I wrote to him quite a lot and wanted to go on expeditions with him.
Did he write back to you?
Yeah, he didn't, unfortunately. But I actually was supposed to meet him once and ended up having a tooth problem and having to go to the dentist the last minute.
Oh,
and,
no.
My mum went off and met him and he signed me a book, which was fantastic. His first book, Life on Earth. So I was pretty happy about that. But I've kind of always had a passion for the environment, always wanted to be sort of outside and in it and just really enjoy sort of very diverse environments. So when it came to sort of university and I was looking at courses to study, geology seemed very natural. It seemed like the right fit for me. I actually studied geology at school, which was one of the few schools that kind of offered it. So I'd already sort of got a bit of a head start. Did geology partway through the degree. They offered up an environmental stream, environmental earth sciences, it was called. So I jumped onto that and focused on that and then completed the degree. And then I was looking at, what the range of roles a geologist could do. And clearly mining and sort of exploration, a big focus areas. There wasn't obviously that sort of market in the UK. There's some, but not as much as, say, Australia.
Yeah. And
so I kind of decided to travel. I wanted to see the world, see some of those environments I'd studied and, just sort of, before I sort of settled into a career. So I sort of waved goodbye to the family and said I'd be back in a couple of years and headed off to, through to the States and to the Caribbean and then into Australia. And my plan was to overland home from Australia. And so my sort of round the world ticket was only halfway round. It actually finished in Australia from a plane travel standpoint. And I had a year working visa in Australia, and the idea was to work here and then travel back. And I ended up staying, and I'm sort of here 27 years later.
Yeah, right. So at that point, was that when you decided to deviate, I guess, from that traditional career path for a geologist? Was it in Australia that you did that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I sort of I don't know whether it was a deviation. I was probably just not sure what to do with the geology degree per se. I mean, I knew the mining sector and, I was always planning to sort of go across to sort of Kalgoorlie and those areas and sort of, get into work there and probably sort of start from there. But as it happened, and like most things in life, you sort of don't follow a linear path. And so I bounced around on the east coast of Australia for a while. I did a lot of random jobs, just enjoying the travel aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So I travelled with the show. I did work to the Royal Easter Show in Sydney, selling show bags.
Oh, you're a carny.
Yeah, there's a showy, they call it.
Oh,
in
a showy,
Australia.
okay.
A showy. So I did that, and I actually travelled all the way up through New South Wales and Queensland and outback Queensland, and selling show bags to kids. So which was fantastic fun. I met a girl, she was from Melbourne. I kind of came back down to Melbourne, and sort of found some work in Melbourne for a while, just again, sort of landscaping and bar work and that type of thing. And then I ended up meeting a guy who was working for an environmental consultancy for a company that was based in Sydney, but they were looking to start up an office in Victoria, in Melbourne. And so I met this guy, Richard Campbell, his name, and he offered me a part-time role to pretty much help him establish the business. And that was really focused on contaminated land. And it wasn't something I actually had a strong knowledge of. We did a bit of it at a university, and obviously had a focus on sort of environmental impacts of, anthropogenic impacts, but nothing sort of too extensive. So it was a bit of a learning curve early days. I did a lot of working on sort of drill rigs and drilling holes in petrol stations and landfills and other contaminated sites.
And are we talking about early 2000s now?
Yeah, yes, we are. 1998, I think I started my career.
So you've moved on from there, obviously, to your current role. And what does your current role involve?
I'm I see myself probably as a bit of a translator, I think. I'm in between a client with a complex environmental problem and a team and a broad industry of experts with, potential solutions. It's trying to really focus on trying to obviously grow the Ventia business and the environmental services that we offer and the remediation projects that we deliver. So, kind of identify which of those projects are out there, when are they going to come to sort of market, and how we can help those clients with those problems. But, the problems are very sort of diverse and quite complex in what they're required to be delivered. It can be anything from civil engineering to process engineering, environmental, management issues around the site, community engagement. There's a lot of sort of factors to all bring together to be able to deliver a successful project. And I find that I spend a lot of time working with clients to understand what their problem is, feed that back to the team in general, and then sort of really work with the client to develop a solution that can be implemented successfully.
So I guess, would you say that a lot of your solutions are quite bespoke then, and you do look at a lot of new technologies?
Yes, we do. So, every site is different. It's an environmental system we're dealing with. So, we're working currently in the middle of Kakadu. We've just started work on a uranium mine in Kakadu that's going through closure. So obviously a very sensitive environment, a lot of stakeholder engagement, traditional owner engagement required there, but then complex in the actual sort of engineering and delivery that's requiring sort of, different technologies or applications to address the issues that we're dealing with. So we do look at, different technologies for different problems, depending on whether we're treating chemicals in soil or water and what we need to do to actually sort of to treat those chemicals, whether it's a biological system, whether it's a thermal approach, it can be a physical, or a chemical kind of solution. So we're always looking at sort of new technologies. As a contractor, we kind of like to talk to our clients and talk about the idea that we have all the tools in the toolbox, depending on what the problem is that they have.
And what types of new or emerging technologies or methods, like new methods, have you been able to investigate and potentially use in your career to help your clients?
Well, the one I've been mostly focused on in the past sort of 6-7 years really has been around PFAS. I'm not sure if your listeners are aware of PFAS, but per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So they're a fluorine chemistry, basically, that's a man-made, a chemical family They're very ubiquitous now in the environment through a lot of different uses. Predominantly, or one of the major uses we're sort of focused on is the use of these chemicals in firefighting foams. These foams have been used obviously in quite large volumes, both in training and in actual fire situations across many sites at airports, refineries, mine sites, defense bases. The chemicals themselves are very persistent in the environment. They're sort of been nicknamed forever chemicals. You find them in, a large percentage of the, human population blood. So we're already kind of have them in our bodies and in our systems and across, across the environment generally. So these is the PFAS family, it's been an issue in Australia, or it's sort of emerged or as a group of contaminants round about sort of 2013, 2012, 2013. And Ventia has been quite focused on how can we remove PFAS from the environment, particularly from soils. They bind very strongly in soils and can contribute sort of to, from a soil source area into groundwater and then spread quite far and wide in the groundwater. So we've developed technology to effectively take the PFAS from the soil through a modified soil washing approach. So what we're trying to do is really treat the soil areas, reduce the volume of the PFAS in that area through removing it from the source soils by washing, ending up with a concentrated chemical mass and then a clean soil that can be reused back on site.
And this is called Source Zone, this new technology,
right.
that your team's developed through Ventia. Can you tell me more about the process of how it's used to remove, I think it's up to, was it 99% of PFAS mass from soil? Yeah, take me through that.
Yeah, sure. It's at the moment, it's quite a large plant we have. We're working with Commonwealth clients to work on these source areas at their sites. So where the fire trainings occurred, where there's been sort of releases of these foams, you get quite high concentrations of PFAS. What we do is we excavate the material. We take it into the plant. Basically, it's a physiochemical process. So what we're actually doing is we're separating the soil into its fractions, whether it's sands, silts, gravels, and the organic fraction within the soil. So we're basically splitting the soil, into its fractions through a variety of different means, density, separators and scrubbers and the like. And then what we're doing is we're treating the water at every phase. So we're transferring the PFAS from the soil particles and the soil fraction into the water phase. And then we're treating the water through a variety of resins and activated carbon to capture the PFAS in the water stream. And we do that at each sort of stage of the process. And what you end up with is the clean fractions of the soil, which we can then obviously give back to our clients as recreated as a soil, and it can go back into, to be reused on the sites, then saving it going to landfill or, to other areas. So it's, the technology itself from an application, soil washing is very much, it's a mineral processing type of technology that it's used in a lot of mining applications, around the world. And what we've done is we've modified it, we've engineered it so we can actually manage the PFAS issue throughout the process. We've patented that process as well. So it's a world's first in that regard.
And what happens with the water at the end?
So the water is cleaned through a water treatment process. So the PFAS water treatment is quite an established sort of science these days. There's quite large volumes of water being cleaned around the planet for PFAS. So the technology's, it's quite adaptable. Technology is quite adaptable for back-end water treatment. So basically what happens is that the PFAS is goes into the water stream. The water's cleaned through resin and other media, which basically strips the PFAS off. You end up with a very small volume of PFAS waste. And what we're doing with that is that we're taking that to a thermal treatment facility that we run down in Melbourne, a facility called Earthshore. And we're putting the PFAS into a thermal destruction process where it actually destroys the chemicals.
Okay. And this Earthshore is actually a Ventia joint venture with Suez, or now Veolia, which has established the soil treatment facility in Victoria that you spoke about. The facility is licensed to accept and treat category A, B and C reportable priority waste in Victoria, including PFAS. So can you tell me how this facility can help with sustainable solutions in a circular economy?
Sure. It's the facility has been something that we've been working on for quite some time as well, and the idea. And it's something that's sort of, it's building around the country. Victoria's probably led the charge in many ways with establishing these types of facilities. There's a number in Victoria. They're starting to emerge in New South Wales, and we'll see them in other states, over the next few years, I'm sure. But really, you're talking about, quite large volumes of soil go to landfill. Australia, I think, obviously is such a big country. Many people sort of just assume that there's so much space that, well, just dig it up and take the problem somewhere else. And, we certainly do seem to have that sort of dig and dump mentality, and major projects and large sort of urban renewal projects where, there's basements for car parking. You do need to move the soil away from the site. But really putting soil from one hole in the ground into another hole in the ground is not entirely sustainable. We're taking up quite a lot of landfill space, with soil, which doesn't necessarily need to be there. So what we're trying to do is look at a way of establishing a facility like we've done, take the soils, clean soil, treat them through a variety of different treatment methods. We've got a thermal treatment facility at Earthshore. We've got the ability to immobilize heavy metals in soils. We're looking at, other treatment methodologies down there. And the idea then really is that you can treat the soil, clean the soil, and put the soil back into what they call a beneficial reuse. It can be reused again in landscape settings. It can be reused, on sort of noise mounds along freeways, or, even into sort of clean fill sites where soil's required. So you're actually sort of just trying to bring a bit more circularity to the whole process, rather than it just being the airspace of a landfill filled up with effectively soil, when we do generate a lot of other wastes. Getting a new landfill license is challenging. No one wants a landfill near their house. So, why would you fill up an existing landfill with soil when you've probably got other waste that you probably want to kind of dispose there?
And soil is so important in Australia, particularly our topsoils. And I'm guessing when we're talking about PFAS contamination from firefighting foam, a lot of that would potentially be topsoils that we're actually dealing with. So at the end of the process, does the soil need a lot of inputs to help it become a growing media again? Like, does it become quite sterile through the process?
Not so much in the soil washing process. We do strip out a lot of the organic matter, and the PFAS does tend to bind to organic matter, so that, you are targeting that to get it out there. But, adding organics back into the soil's not particularly challenging. We can effectively, recreate any soil you like in a way, because what you've done is you've taken it down to those fractions. So depending on the soil types, around the country, the site we're working on in South Australia is quite heavy clays, so our removal efficiency for the PFAS is reduced with clay. Obviously, it's a lot higher with sands. So it depends on, the soil type that we start with, and then what the client needs at the back end of it, and where the soils are going back to. But from a sort of a biological standpoint, you can kind of recreate that soil. Thermal treatment's slightly different. Obviously, once you've done a high temperature thermal on soils, and we treat soil at a sort of, anywhere sort of 300 to 500 degrees C to actually drive the contamination from the soil into the gas phase, and then treat it as a gas issue. Then the soil comes out the side clean. It's sterilized because of the heat. But again, you can rebuild those soils. They're probably better from a geotechnical standpoint than they are from a growth medium, though.
In your time at Ventia, you and your team have won some really prestigious awards quite recently. Do you have a favourite project that has won an award recently?
I look back on a lot of the projects we've delivered and, I'm very proud of the work we've done and the teams delivered. We certainly, as I say, we've worked on some very challenging projects, and it's been great to get recognition externally, with awards. We've picked up some awards recently for the work that we did at Kendall Bay, and that project I've been involved with since around 2010. So it was great to see it sort of finally completed. It's sort of, it's been a long road there, but that was the remediation of contaminated sediments in Sydney Harbour. We actually posed an in situ capping approach to those sediments and worked on the water with a lot of residential housing around the Bay Area where we were working. And so a lot of residents, with a keen focus on the work that we were doing. And that was pretty much a world's first. There was a project in the US where there'd been a trial on this methodology, but not sort of taken through to full scale yet. And we sort of took the idea, did the trial, and then actually delivered it at a full scale. And that's won a number of project management awards. So I was very proud of the team, for that particular project. As a favorite project, it's a tricky one. There's a project in the Northern Territory that we did at a place called the Cox Peninsula. I think that's probably got a sort of, kind of a strong hold in my heart. We worked pretty hard to secure the project with the Commonwealth Government. Fundamentally, the project we involved remediation of an old antenna station that had a mix of contaminants from PCBs to organopesticides, where they'd applied sort of insecticides underneath the slabs to stop termite issues over the years, asbestos, heavy metals, and we ended up with a small thermal treatment plant doing some heavy metal immobilization for lead, as well as creating an on-site containment cell for asbestos. And all of that work facilitated the settlement of one of the longest running land claims in Australia, the Kenby land claim.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fantastic to be a part of. You could see the sort of passion from the traditional owners about sort of settling this claim. Malcolm Turnbull, the PM at the time, sort of handed the deeds sort of back to the traditional owners, and we were there for that. And so it was a nice project to be part of because of the sort of closure, of the site and what it meant to people.
Yeah, and I guess being able to see the bigger picture and the bigger impact of the work you do, that's always a nice thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Some projects, we're sort of just, they're, urban renewal. You can see that what once was sort of an underutilized part of a city or, an area is now sort of some kind of thriving economy, whether it's residential or some sort of, new urban precinct, and that's great to see that. But it's sort of, it's a bit more sort of structural in a way, whereas, the Cox Peninsula and actually what the land meant to the traditional owners sort of it really resonated with me.
So what's next for your team?
We're working on a project in Kakadu. We're just starting on that now. That's probably got quite a long way to go. It will take quite a few years. It's a very large project. And again, sort of, the eyes of the world are sort of on it for the location that it's in, the fact that it was, a former uranium mine. So, I think there'll be a lot of learning from that project. And we're very keen to sort of get involved and help that project, sort of come to life. So we're looking at that one. We're very much focused on the sort of the energy transition. We've sort of, we can see that the closure of the coal power stations, we're working on a couple of those projects. And we're starting to see, that sort of energy transition across the country and what that means for sort of remediation and decommissioning and cleanup. We've done a lot of gas works historically and remediated probably sort of 20 23 or 24 gasworks sites across the country. Probably the bulk of, the large gasworks projects, Ventia and Thiess formerly have completed those. And that was the sort of that was the energy source from the 1850s to the 1950s. So you sort of had that, the gas was created by effectively cracking coal, heating coal in ovens and driving the gas out of the coal and using the gas for street lights and heating and, those kind of issues. So that was a sort of an energy type, that sort of fed off the back of the Industrial Revolution and helped, our society grow. And we spent a lot of time cleaning the legacy of those up. And now we're sort of moving into coal-powered stations, and we're seeing a lot of work around the oil and gas sector, decommissioning on and offshore wells, as well as obviously fracking sites that have been developed that obviously now need cleanup. So we're sort of seeing this energy transition piece still flowing through for our industry. There's always something to clean up.
It's very, very cyclical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
The next new thing will be our legacy in another, 100 years' time for cleanup.
Yep. That's right. And, it's obviously, I'm sort of, I'm looking into, what might be the legacy of, renewables. It's sort of, we're all moving into that at a rapid pace, which is fantastic to see and obviously so important. But we've still got to kind of approach these things and make sure that we're starting them with an end in mind and an understanding of the wastes that we generate through all these different waste streams and where they end up. How are we managing them? I think we're very good at turning a blind eye to our own wastes. And, that's to the detriment of the environment generally. And then, of course, you have these issues, that come around as a legacy site and what might be a waste dump that's far away from population nowadays. And everyone goes, that's great. Dump it out the back there. In 30 years, there could be a housing estate next to it. And those wastes could be impacting, human health in that location.
So when looking at the bigger picture, as we've been talking about, you mentioned that your expertise is in breaking down the big complex problems for clarity and focus. Can you run me through how you go about doing that?
Sure. It's very different with each client and each problem, but the challenge is invariably that someone has an environmental problem of some kind. How well defined that problem is often challenging. It's to do a lot of investigation around a large brownfield site or a precinct or a mine or a power station is obviously, very costly, and it's, often done over many years. So the information can be disconnected. It can be done by different companies over time. Information can be in different reporting formats or in different locations. So, bringing all of that together, developing a bit of a remediation plan is often done sort of by consultants, and then the consultants tend to pass that through into the client, and the client looks out to the market to companies like Ventia to take on the contracting of the solution delivery. Mm-hmm. The risks that we see and the issues that we need to address to be able to sort of deliver a solution often aren't addressed as part of those investigations, early investigations. So there's a piece around sort of data gaps and, lack of information or problem definition that we need to develop. And often, in some instances, clients are quite well advanced down a path where they sort of think they've got the full solution and all they need to do is go and sort of engage a company to do that. And, we might then sort of talk to them and say, look, you're actually not at the point you think you are. We're still going to need more information. So you've got to sort of manage the time expectations around some of these projects and how they're addressed. There's also budget issues. Sometimes a budget's been thrown out very early on a project with sort of limited information, but a ballpark estimate's been generated, and then everyone sort of hangs their hat on that ballpark estimate, even up to sort of board level and, sort of corporate reporting. And then, of course, when you get into the nitty gritty of actually delivering the job and all the other sort of facets that might come with the delivery of it, whether that's community engagement and management, approvals, permits, the actual sort of civil, environmental engineering complexities of delivery as well. And suddenly the budgets, is different. So you've got to manage that as well. So, we like to try and work with clients very early on. Once they're starting down that path, start to give them a view of what that sort of end result looks like, other projects that have been delivered that might be similar or offer a similar view to them. It's a very sort of educational type process to bring them up to speed in what they're actually dealing with. Some clients obviously are highly educated in the space. They're chemical companies, the oil and gas companies, they kind of know what they're sort of dealing with. But, other clients such as government agencies where obviously sort of remediation is not a core business for them, and project teams are formed from across agencies to try and deliver something. It might not be something that they actually have a lot of experience doing. So you're sort of really trying to get them to understand what they don't know and what they need to know, and then really frame the project the right way. Remediation projects are notoriously risky, and there's been a lot of problematic problems around the country and around the world. And a lot of things where, people have ended up being quite heavily impacted by it. So you've got to sort of make sure that you're really setting yourself up for success from the very outset and really focusing on that and working, with very sort of broad disciplined teams, both within Ventia and external subcontractors and advisors, the regulators, and then the client, really trying to bring it all together early on, picture the end result, and then sort of work towards that successful outcome.
Yeah, and these teams that you've just described, the people in these teams would have competing priorities, differences of opinion based on their own expertise and definitely on personalities, which is something that I've learned a lot about recently.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's the best way to bring all these people together as a team and work towards that common goal that you've mentioned?
Oh, well, I'm a firm believer in trying to put myself in other people's shoes and sort of see the challenge or the opportunity through their eyes. So I really do try and apply that as much as I can and sort of think, well, what do they want out of this process and what are they trying to achieve? You could be very base and say that it's always just about everyone making some money or, it's an economic driver is fundamental. But, people do have, a kind of a broad range of drivers themselves, personal and professionally. And, you've got to sort of try and recognize those, make sure that view is seen and recognized and addressed, and then really try and sort of show everyone what success looks like to them. Not just about the project, a successful project, but what will you get out of that, because of that success. How does, why should we try and all work together in that kind of way to get the outcome we need? It's not just about sort of ticking a box or, completing another project or, just achieving something for a client, but what do you get out of it as well? So, I really try and do that throughout on the larger complex projects, really try and work with the team as a whole and understand those drivers.
So what happens when we lose focus on the bigger picture?
Well, I think what happens is that either projects aren't delivered, they're either not delivered at all, or they're delivered badly or late, or potentially unsafely as well. Obviously, there's a lot of in my industry and with some of the projects we do, there's some huge risks that you need to be addressed, and we engineer. We have a safety and design approach, and really kind of focus on engineering out, safety risks. But that's a big challenge. So if you don't sort of if you don't get it right from the outcome, litigation is another, big spectre that looms on the horizon. There's certainly been some sites that haven't gone well, ended up very acrimoniously with clients and contractors and consultants and, other stakeholders all pointing fingers at each other. And, there's class actions running around the country around different issues, whether it's PFAS or asbestos. There's communities that can be impacted by by, projects that aren't managed well, whether that's, adjacent to a former smelter or, areas where, they kind of, they've just not been consulted well, or the regulators sort of missed something. So, it does impact people in many different ways. And I just think it's just important to try and get it right as best you can from the outset, really.
Yeah.
It's like everything else, really.
That's right. Everything in life.
It's just not projects.
Yeah. So in that regard to getting it right, is there one project that stands out in your mind as your personal best achievement in this regard?
Ooh.
Big question.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think about, all the projects. As I say, they're so diverse, and we've done so many over the years. They've all had, highlights for sure. I certainly think the Cox Peninsula was definitely one that, it was important for why it was being delivered. It was, all the project teams, from the client's consultants to our subcontractors to, all the stakeholders came together very well around that, I felt. There's been other projects like that, gasworks projects. We've done quite a number, as I say, of these old gasworks. We did one down at Wollongong, and I think that was also a fantastic example of sort of collaboration between, the client and ourselves with that. We really looked at the land use of, the future land use of the site, and really sort of kind of designed the remediation to really meet that future land use. And that, that project was great for that facet. I don't know whether I actually have a full, number one standout from them all. I really enjoy sort of the diversity of the environments that we work in, and the challenges that those bring, whether it's on Sydney Harbour or, remote, regional communities, or, very remote regions. We work with, treating contaminated sediments. We treat water, groundwater, soils, obviously. So it's a very diverse kind of field in some ways. I mean, I'm often traveling around the country, going to these places, and, I talk to my friends and they say, "Oh, it's fantastic. You're going to go up to Darwin." And I say, "Yeah, it is, but I'm off to look at probably some of the worst."
Yeah.
I'm not going to look at the best bit of Darwin. I'm going to look at the worst bit of Darwin. So, it can be confronting in that regard, but, as I say, I enjoy all the projects we do. I like the fact that we get the ability to look long term and work with clients on some of the larger, sort of more complex projects. And, and the challenges those bring.
You've obviously spent your career to date investigating and remediating legacy soil and water contamination from past human activities. What challenges do you see ahead in the future?
Well, I suppose as I touched on earlier, I think it's really sort of understanding that the waste streams and, the issues that we're going to face with future wastes. I read an article this morning, which actually, I think it's the stat is from 2016. So it's sort of, 7 years out of date, but it basically said that, there's a new synthetic chemical created every 1.4 seconds. So if you kind of think about that, and that was from 2016, the sort of the volume of, chemicals that we're putting into the environment, inadvertently or advertently, is very challenging. There's not a lot of these chemicals are regulated. We're sort of quite happy to embrace a sort of a wonder product of any kind. And, asbestos would have been an example of that in the past. And, these PFAS chemicals are certainly another. So we're very quick to come out with new ways of making our life probably easier, or perceived, easier through different ways of convenience. But then we don't sort of really truly see the wastes that we're actually generating from the back end, and the management and processes that we have around those wastes. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have, where we've sort of as a species turned a blind eye to what we produce out the back. And it doesn't matter whether it's gases into the climate or chemicals into the ground, where we need to get better at managing those. So I think there's going to be some issues around that. I certainly see microplastics as being a big problem. And that's something that obviously we're currently dealing with now, and we'll start to see some more challenges around that. How microplastics will be remediated from the environment, is something, we're starting to consider, but, it's not really, I'm not seeing anything happening yet about it. I can see, obviously, we're trying to remove litter from our environment and plastics where we can, but, microplastics are going to be far more challenging, and we're seeing them turn up in blood and, in the stomachs of many creatures. And, it's a building kind of, what would you say, a building wave of chemistry that we're sort of facing down all the time.
I guess it's quite scary, really, when you put it, in that, to, that size, that what we're looking at with the microplastics. Basically, we need to filter the entire world at some point.
That's it. I mean, but we know that we're not going to filter the world. We know that's unlikely. What we've got to do is just sort of understand, where it's causing sort of the greatest impact. How can we kind of stop generating them at a source, so we're not actually kind of creating the volumes of these things anymore. And really turn the tap off where we can. And then obviously look at what we can need to do off the sort of the back end, the receptor, and understand, what needs to be addressed. Where's the sort of high value remedial activities that we can undertake that will actually, have an impact, whether that's on human populations or on the natural environment and biota generally. So it's, trying to get their heads around that, get organizations, government agencies, governments generally, to coordinate, I think is going to be the challenge of the future. And you can see bits of it happening here and there through the EU and America and, some, bits and pieces in Australia. But, we probably just need to get a lot more focused on it, make sure that there's money applied to it. And, there's obviously a lot of people working on the challenges, which is the optimistic note to, the scariness of it all. But that's the challenge, and that's what we're all doing, I suppose. Well, a lot of us are, aren't we?
Yep, certainly. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ian. That wraps up this episode of Beyond the Green Line. I've loved talking to you. It's been really, really fascinating. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate you asking me to come onto your podcast, and look forward to hearing more episodes.
Sounds great. That wraps up this episode of Beyond the Green Line. Thanks for listening. This has been Chanel Gleeson-Willie.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Green Line, brought to you by Moss Environmental. Subscribe to our podcast for your weekly invitation to join the conversation. Until next time, keep thinking green.